Welcome everyone! Today, John will explain how to create a rubric and attach it to an open response item.
So next up are rubrics, and rubrics in SchoolNet are pretty much exclusively for scoring open response items. So if, you use a lot of open response items, or maybe you have a standard rubric that you use to grade those open response items, building that rubric out in SchoolNet is going to make it easier to grade those open responses that are coming back in. When you go to grade the test, you're going to see the rubric right there, and you can very quickly click the student's performance level per your custom rubric. And yet again, we're under assessments and the second create link under items, rubrics, and passages. And this time I'm going to create a rubric. And so the first thing it's going to ask you is to choose your grouping. And by default, grouping is going to be disabled. And so what that means is it gives you an example here. Grouping disabled is just a sort of basic plain old rubric, right? You've got your levels along the top. You've got your skills or areas being assessed along the side. Descriptions in here, and a student is going to receive a score in each box. So they'll receive a 1 or 2 for clear thesis. They'll receive a 1 or 2 for presentation, right? We can also enable grouping, which is going to group these skills or areas being assessed. And when we do that, we can choose to either score each skill or score the group. So what do I mean by that? So with grouping enabled, now clear thesis and logical progression, the two things we're being scored on, are grouped under the content heading. But students will still receive scores for clear thesis and for logical progression. So I'm scoring each one of these boxes, right? I can also flip it to score entry by group. So doing it that way, I'm scoring students on content overall, a 1 or 2 on content, which is made up of a clear thesis and logical progression. So I feel like it sounds a little confusing, but you have a lot of options for how to organize your rubric. I'm going to keep it simple for mine and just leave grouping turned off. And once you hit choose to choose your grouping, you get dropped into the create rubric screen. And you can give it a name. And you'll select a subject. Now, when we're thinking about rubrics and open responses, my mind at least jumps straight to, okay, it's ELA, right? But think about other uses for this. Maybe you have some open response items on math assessments that ask students to explain their reasoning or explain their process for coming up with an answer. And maybe you want to build a rubric to grade those responses. I think that could be pretty cool. So we'll plug in a name, a subject, a grade level. You'll set your scale, whether you want to scale it based on levels or based on point values. So this is this level 1, 2, and 3, or are they scoring 1 points, 2 points, or 3 points? Up to you. You can set the rubric language here, and you do have a few additional optional fields. So if you wanted to organize your rubrics by keyword, or maybe you've got rights to use a rubric from a particular publisher, you could put that in here. And over here to the right, I'll point out you can change your grouping setting if you want at this point after you've started, but I'm just going to leave mine alone. Once you've entered in sort of this basic info, we'll go down and start building our rubric. So along the top, each column is the level, so level 1, level 2, level 3. You can add additional columns here if you wanted 4 levels or even more. You can take them back out with this little trash can icon. And then down along the left, you'll have the qualities or traits or skills that are being assessed. And you can, again, add additional rows here to add more qualities or skills. So we can start building this out. We'll start with the labels for each of our levels. These might be custom to your classroom or your subject area. Now, when we get into the quality traits or skills, each skill or quality or trait or thing being assessed has to be linked to a standard. So let's go find some standards to link. Sure, we'll just go for that. Maybe something like that. There we go. So we've built out our rubric levels. We've built out the skills or the things being assessed, and we've tied all of those to standards, right? Now we will also need to enter in descriptions for these. So we'll just fill these in with some stuff. You would probably want to be a lot more descriptive with a real rubric because your students would be able to see this, and this is what you would be looking at as you grade. So especially notes that would be helpful to your students or helpful to yourself as you grade this. You would want to plug in here, have some real specific criteria for each level. And once you've got your rubric all set up the way you like, you can go ahead and save that to a bank. And again, it'll pop up and ask you what bank you want to save it to. I'm just going to throw it in my personal bank like we have been. And now we've got a math writing rubric that we can use to score open response items. So how would we actually use this? Let's go take a look at that. So I'm just going to jump back out to the home page. We've got our rubric saved in our personal bank. We're good to go. So let's go create an open response item. So again, we're under assessments and the second create link, and we'll do an open response. So up here at the top, you'll, as usual, select a subject and a grade range. But for step 3, you'll notice there's an or here. So instead of selecting the standards alignment for this question, I'm going to go select a rubric. And this is going to pop up a search and show me all the rubrics I have access to. Here is the rubric we just made. So I'll go ahead and attach that. Now you'll notice most of my options here disappeared, right? It auto-filled that this is 5th grade math. It's using this rubric. If we scroll down to the standard alignment, we can see the standards that are tied to that rubric are now tied to this question. It tells me the standards are locked to the rubric. Now, one thing you can do is tweak the scoring. So if you're using the same rubric multiple times, but maybe this week I really want to assess my decimal operations more, maybe I weigh those heavier than the other 2 standards on the rubric. So that is an option. And you would just go ahead and fill in your question, save it, pull it into an assessment, and when you go to score that response, you will have the rubric available to input student scores. And that rubric will also, again, determine what standards are tied to the question and what standards you ultimately see on your assessment report.